She disappeared. Not into the woods. Not into the night. But into a box, inside a suburban shed, while her captor mowed the lawn like nothing happened. This isn't a horror film. It isn't a campfire story. This is the true case of Cameron Hooker, a man whose capacity for control, cruelty, and deception created one of the most disturbing cases of captivity in modern American crime. And it all begins on a summer road in California, in the late 1970s, when a young woman named Colleen Stan made the fateful choice to trust a stranger. To understand why Colleen raised her thumb that day, you have to understand the culture she lived in. In the 1970s, hitchhiking wasn't the taboo it is today. For young people chasing freedom, it was part of the adventure. America was in the shadow of the Vietnam War, distrust of authority was high, but belief in personal liberty was even higher. Getting into a stranger's car felt bold, rebellious, but not automatically dangerous. Colleen Stan, just 20 years old, fit this cultural moment. She was adventurous, friendly, and trusting. Her friends described her as independent but kind, a little stubborn, and willing to take risks if it meant seeing more of the world. That was who she was on May 19, 1977, when she set out from Eugene, Oregon, to hitchhike to a friend's birthday party in Northern California. She would never make it there.
Welcome to the Crime Ledger, where every page reveals a mystery.
Before we dive in, write in the comments section where you are watching from, and if you are a true crime lover, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, so you will never miss the next true crime stories.
It started like countless other rides. A blue Dodge Colt slowed down on the roadside. Inside, a young couple, Cameron and Janice Hooker, with their baby in the back. To Colleen, it looked safe enough. What danger could there be in a family car? The presence of a wife and a baby seat was disarming. Predators don't usually announce themselves with strollers and diaper bags. But inside that car sat a man already deep into a violent fantasy life, and a wife trapped in his control. The Hookers offered Colleen a ride. She accepted. It would be the last time she made a decision entirely her own for years. On the floor of the car, partially hidden under a blanket, was a strange wooden object. Colleen noticed it, but didn't think much of it. What she didn't know was that Cameron Hooker had built it himself, a head box. Heavy, padded, airtight enough to suppress sound, but with small ventilation holes to keep a victim alive. He had been perfecting it for years, waiting for the moment he could test it. Colleen was that moment. The car rolled down rural roads. Small talk filled the silence. At first, the couple seemed ordinary. But soon, Cameron pulled off the highway onto a desolate stretch. His tone changed. His smile vanished. At knife point, he ordered Colleen into the box. Inside, it was pitch dark. No sound but her own panicked breathing. The world shrank to suffocating dimensions, a coffin for the living. Cameron drove her not to an abandoned warehouse or a remote cabin, but to his own suburban home in Red Bluff, California. There, he carried the box into his shed. A plain wooden building in a backyard, surrounded by picket fences and quiet neighbors. By day, it looked like storage for tools or gardening equipment. But inside, it became a theater for horror. Cameron Hooker didn't live as an outlaw on the fringe of society. He worked odd jobs. He smiled at neighbors. He took his wife and baby for walks. To the outside world, he blended in. But in the shed, he became something else. He suspended Colleen in the air, tied her to beams, and locked her into devices of his own design. He told her she belonged to him now. He stripped her identity away and replaced it with rules. She was not Colleen Stan anymore, she was Kay. His slave. Every part of her life would now be dictated by him. Cameron knew physical restraints alone wouldn't keep a victim forever. So he invented a system of psychological control. He told Colleen she was now the property of a secret organization he called the Company. According to him, this organization was vast, all-seeing, and ruthless. If she disobeyed, they would kill her family, and punish anyone who helped her. It was a lie, but an effective one. Colleen had no reason not to believe him. She was isolated, terrified, and subjected to constant reinforcement of the narrative. Soon, she wasn't just locked in a box, she was locked in fear. Perhaps the most shocking part of this story is the role of Janice Hooker, Cameron's wife. She had known about her husband's violent fantasies before. In fact, she had been victim to them herself. But Cameron promised her something: if she allowed him to take another woman as his prisoner, he would spare Janice from his sadistic experiments. Janice, trapped in her own cycle of abuse, agreed. She became both accomplice and prisoner, feeding Colleen, helping to keep her hidden, all while raising children in the same house. Colleen spent her first months in captivity locked inside the head box for up to 23 hours a day. Imagine it, darkness pressing in on all sides. The smell of your own fear. The inability to move, to stretch, to even cry out. Her world became the size of a coffin. And outside that shed, life continued as normal. Neighbors mowed lawns, children played in sprinklers, barbecues smoked on weekends. No one suspected that a young woman was suffocating just feet away. Days lost meaning. Survival became about endurance. Breathe. Wait. Hope the box opens again. Cameron's cruelty was methodical, but also calculated to break her spirit. He would let her out, only to remind her of his power. He would show her glimpses of normal life, his wife cooking, his children playing, before shoving her back into darkness. The contrast was part of the torture. People often ask, why didn't Colleen run? Why didn't she scream when she saw neighbors? Why didn't she fight? The answer lies in the power of psychological manipulation. Cameron had convinced her that the company was real. That they were always listening. That even a hint of disobedience would mean death. She wasn't just physically restrained. She was mentally caged. And in many ways, that cage was stronger than any lock. Meanwhile, outside the Hooker household, Colleen's family was frantic. She had vanished without a trace. Flyers went up. Police reports were filed. Detectives asked questions, but with no leads and no witnesses, the case quickly went cold. In the 1970s, missing young women were heartbreakingly common. Without evidence of foul play, law enforcement often assumed they had run away. And so Colleen's disappearance faded from headlines, even as her family refused to give up hope. Back at the Hooker home, a routine emerged. Cameron went to work. Janice cared for the children. Colleen waited in the box. Day after day. Week after week. Month after month. It became so normalized that to the Hookers, it was almost mundane. Evil became part of the daily schedule. And that's perhaps the most chilling detail of all, how ordinary it looked from the outside. But captivity is never perfect. Routine breeds patterns. Patterns breed mistakes. Cameron's growing confidence began to show. He allowed Colleen small freedoms, brief walks, chores, glimpses outside the shed. He believed she was too broken to ever fight back. But every allowance was also an opportunity. Colleen, far from broken, was studying him. Watching. Waiting. The world thought she was gone. Her family feared the worst. The police had no leads. But Colleen Stan was very much alive. Alive inside a box. Alive inside a shed. Alive inside the nightmare Cameron Hooker built for her. And what happened next would push the boundaries of captivity, survival, and human resilience further than anyone could imagine. The first months were hell. The box, the suffocating darkness, the total erasure of freedom. But eventually, Cameron Hooker decided that wasn't enough. He wanted more than a prisoner locked away in a shed. He wanted a servant he could parade in plain sight. So he moved Colleen into the house. Not as a guest. Not as family. But as something he called property. Her world didn't expand. It shrank further. Under the couple's bed, Cameron built another coffin-like box, lined with foam, designed to trap sound, and engineered to slide in and out like a drawer. This is where Colleen lived for most of the next 7 years. While Cameron slept beside his wife, his victim lay just inches below them, encased in wood. She could hear muffled footsteps above her, the creak of the mattress, the sounds of a life she could no longer reach. And somehow, this arrangement didn't just last days. It lasted years. To understand how Colleen endured this, you have to understand the power of Cameron's deception. The physical restraints were horrific, but what really trapped her was the belief system he created. The company. He told her this secret organization monitored every move she made. That they controlled his household. That they had agents watching her family. If she tried to run, they would kill her parents. If she disobeyed, she would be tortured or executed. It sounds unbelievable to us. But to someone cut off from the world, deprived of outside voices, and subjected to constant reinforcement, it was terrifyingly plausible. Over time, Colleen began to police herself. Even when the door was unlocked, even when a neighbor was just feet away, she stayed silent. Because in her mind, escape meant death for everyone she loved. This was Cameron Hooker's true genius of evil. He didn't just build a prison of wood and nails. He built a prison inside her mind. The role of Cameron's wife, Janice, makes this case even more disturbing. At first, Janice had been a victim too. She married Cameron as a teenager and quickly became trapped in his sadistic fantasies. He tied her up, whipped her, and forced her into humiliating scenarios. She lived in fear of him. But when Cameron introduced Colleen into their lives, he made Janice a deal. If she allowed him to keep Colleen as a slave, he would spare her from his most violent behaviors. Desperate for relief, Janice agreed. Her complicity grew over time. She cared for the children, cooked meals, and occasionally fed Colleen scraps of food. She even pretended that Colleen's captivity was normal. In doing so, she blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. This duality, terror mixed with cooperation, would later become one of the most hotly debated aspects of the case. Was Janice herself a prisoner of Cameron's psychological domination? Or was she an accomplice who enabled his cruelty? What makes the Hooker case uniquely chilling is how ordinary everything looked from the outside. Neighbors described Cameron as quiet, polite, maybe a little odd but certainly not dangerous. Janice was seen pushing strollers, chatting with other mothers, and attending church. Their children played in the yard, their house looked tidy, and nothing suggested that a woman was being tortured in secret just beneath the marital bed. Even family members visited without ever suspecting. This is the horror of domesticated evil. It doesn't announce itself with chaos. It hides in routine. It thrives in silence. Years in captivity changed Colleen profoundly. She was no longer the free-spirited 20-year-old who once laughed easily and trusted strangers. She became quiet, obedient, almost mechanical in her responses. Cameron had reshaped her into someone who could survive his rules. She learned when to speak and when to stay silent. She learned how to anticipate his moods, how to avoid punishments, and how to make herself small enough to endure. But beneath the obedience, she held on to something vital, the will to live. Even in the worst moments, when she couldn't breathe inside the box, when she believed the company might kill her family, when escape seemed impossible, she clung to survival. One breath at a time. One day at a time. As the years passed, Cameron's control shifted. He began to believe he had broken Colleen completely. He thought she was too conditioned to ever defy him. So he loosened the leash. He allowed her to perform chores around the house. He let her care for the children. He even permitted her to work in the garden or take short walks outside. From the outside, she looked like a family friend or a live-in nanny. No one questioned why she was always quiet, why she never left alone, or why her eyes seemed distant. But these permissions were part of the control. They weren't acts of kindness. They were tests. Cameron wanted to see how deep his psychological hold went. And every time Colleen obeyed, every time she returned to the box without running, he grew more convinced of his power. There were moments, agonizing to imagine, when Colleen could have spoken up. Once, Cameron took her to visit her own family. She sat at their dinner table. She hugged her parents. She looked into her sister's eyes. But she said nothing. Why? Because she believed the company was watching. She believed one wrong word would bring death to everyone she loved. So she smiled, reassured her parents that she was fine, and returned willingly with Cameron. Her family, relieved to see her alive, assumed she was safe. They never guessed the truth. This visit has haunted Colleen ever since. It is perhaps the most chilling testament to the power of psychological manipulation. She was free enough to touch her family, but not free enough to tell them the truth. Over the years, neighbors noticed odd things. Cameron was seen working on wooden boxes and strange contraptions in his shed. He was secretive, but not alarming enough to call the police. In small towns, people mind their own business. They assume quirks are harmless. And so no one looked too closely. This collective blindness allowed Cameron to continue his reign of control unchecked. But make no mistake, Colleen was not completely broken. Inside, she was gathering strength. She learned to study Cameron's patterns. She counted his steps, memorized his routines, and waited for cracks in his system. Her obedience wasn't always surrender. Sometimes, it was survival disguised as submission. Her greatest weapon wasn't escape, it was endurance. By living, she denied Cameron the ultimate victory. While Cameron believed he was in control, his marriage to Janice was deteriorating. The burden of the secret, the constant presence of Colleen, and the lies they told their community all weighed on Janice. Her faith conflicted with her complicity. Her fear of Cameron clashed with her guilt. Over time, cracks appeared. She began to resent Cameron's obsession with Colleen. She began to see through the company myth. And most dangerously for Cameron, she began to consider telling the truth. After 7 years of control, the power balance began to shift. Colleen was still in prison, but Cameron's arrogance was growing. He believed he had engineered the perfect system. But arrogance breeds mistakes. And Janice, after years of silence, was reaching a breaking point. What she revealed would shatter the illusion completely. For 7 years, Colleen Stan lived in silence, under a bed, in a shed, inside a lie. She endured the unendurable, believing her life and her family's lives depended on obedience. But no prison lasts forever. The cracks in Cameron Hooker's empire of control were spreading. And soon, one voice, Janice's, would change everything. By the early 1980s, Cameron Hooker believed he had perfected the art of control. He had a victim who obeyed his every command. He had a wife who played her part. He had children who grew up believing the odd rhythms of their household were normal. But control is a fragile thing. It only works as long as the illusion holds. And in Cameron's house, that illusion was beginning to splinter. Janice, his wife, had spent years rationalizing her complicity. At first, she convinced herself she was also a victim. That Cameron forced her to participate, that her silence was survival. But as years dragged on, silence began to feel like betrayal. She looked at her children and wondered what kind of world she was raising them in. Most of all, she watched Cameron's obsession with Colleen grow stronger, until it threatened to consume everything else. And deep down, Janice knew, if she didn't break free, no one ever would. The turning point came in 1984. Janice had been wrestling with guilt, with fear, with the erosion of her faith. She was part of a church community, and the contradiction between the teachings she heard on Sundays and the life she lived at home grew unbearable. Finally, she confided in her pastor. The words tumbled out: the box, the shed, the years of silence. The pastor's reaction was clear and immediate. This was not just a marital problem. This was a crime. He told Janice she had to go to the police. For the first time in 7 years, the silence was broken. Janice walked into a police station and told them everything. At first, detectives could hardly believe it. The details were too bizarre, too extreme. A woman held captive under a bed. A head box designed to suppress screams. A fabricated organization used to terrify a victim into obedience. But the more Janice talked, the more consistent the story became. And when officers searched the Hooker home, the evidence was undeniable. There it was. The box. The restraints. The typed slave contract Cameron had forced Colleen to sign, declaring herself his property. Every twisted detail Janice described was real. The truth was stranger, and more horrifying, than anyone imagined. For Colleen, the revelation was almost as shocking as the captivity itself. For years, she had lived under the shadow of the company. Every decision, every moment of silence, every act of obedience was fueled by the belief that an all-seeing organization was monitoring her. Now she learned it had never existed. It was all Cameron's invention. The walls of her prison were never made of iron or chains. They were made of lies. This realization was both liberating and devastating. She had endured 7 years of suffering under rules that were nothing but smoke. She could have spoken up at any time. She could have run. She could have screamed to her parents during that family visit. But she hadn't, because Cameron had mastered the art of psychological warfare. With Janice's testimony and Colleen's account, Cameron Hooker was arrested. He showed little remorse. In his mind, he had done nothing unusual. He framed himself as a man with unusual desires, yes, but not a criminal. He told investigators that Colleen had consented. That she stayed willingly. That she was part of the family. The arrogance of his defense only deepened the horror of the evidence. Prosecutors were determined to prove otherwise. The trial of Cameron Hooker was a sensation. The details were so surreal that journalists sometimes struggled to describe them without sounding like they were recounting a horror novel. The jury heard about the head box, the years of confinement, the elaborate lies about the company, and the signed slave contract. Colleen testified about the endless silence, the suffocating darkness, the moments when hope felt like a distant rumor. Janice testified about her complicity, her fear, and her eventual decision to come forward. The defense tried to argue that Colleen had been a willing participant, that she had chosen to stay, that she could have run but didn't. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative. They showed how Cameron had stripped away Colleen's ability to make choices. How fear had been weaponized to enslave her mind. The jury deliberated. And when the verdict came, it was decisive. Cameron Hooker was found guilty. The judge sentenced him to 104 years in prison. The number was symbolic as much as it was practical, a sentence long enough to ensure that Cameron Hooker would never walk free again. For Colleen, it was a moment of vindication, but not closure. Because how do you measure justice against 7 years of captivity? How do you rebuild a life stolen in silence? Colleen Stan emerged into freedom carrying scars that no one could see. She struggled to reintegrate into society, to rebuild relationships, to reclaim her identity. She had lost her early 20s, the years when most people discover who they are, build careers, fall in love, make mistakes, and dream of the future. Instead, she had spent those years in a box. But she refused to let Cameron define the rest of her life. She eventually built a family of her own, spoke publicly about her experiences, and became a symbol of resilience. Her story has been told in documentaries, interviews, and books, not because she sought fame, but because she wanted others to understand the power of psychological control, and the importance of never underestimating the will to survive. The Hooker case remains one of the most disturbing examples of long-term captivity in American history. It forced law enforcement to confront the reality of psychological coercion, a concept that isn't as visible as bruises or chains but can be just as powerful. It showed that victims don't always scream, don't always run, don't always fight, because sometimes, the prison isn't built of bars. It's built of fear. It also raised uncomfortable questions about complicity. About how someone like Janice could live with such a secret for years, and how neighbors could overlook the signs. Most of all, it left behind a haunting truth: evil doesn't always look like a monster lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, it looks like a polite man in a family car. Cameron Hooker remains behind bars. His name is etched into the annals of true crime as a symbol of sadistic control. But the haunting question lingers. How many other sheds are there? How many ordinary homes hide extraordinary horrors behind tidy lawns and quiet routines? We like to believe we would notice. We like to think we would hear the muffled cries, see the strange behaviors, sense the wrongness. But the Hooker case proves otherwise. For 7 years, a young woman lived under a bed. Neighbors waved, children played, and life went on, while silence covered a nightmare. Colleen Stan's survival is a testament to human resilience. She endured the unendurable, lived through the impossible, and emerged with her spirit intact. But the story of Cameron Hooker is also a warning that evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it builds boxes. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes, it lives right next door. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more true crime stories told like never before.